Ed Husic, the government has come up with a target. It says it sits fairly much in the middle of what comparable countries are doing. It says, the Prime Minister says, there's a balance there between jobs and economic growth and the environment, and it's no good, supporting the environment at the cost of economic growth. Hasn't the government found a pretty good sort of compromise there?
No, I think we're behind the pack when it comes to dealing with a critical issue that will impact on the broader community and our economy in due course. We are faced now with a situation where the government wants to do the bare minimum. It wants to do the least it has to on this front because it reflects a broader notion that they are not committed to doing what they can or respecting the community's views that we should be doing what we can to address climate change.
So what should the target be there?
And what should be done. And if you look at what the government has put forward yesterday, they've put forward a package that, the modelling hasn't been released and there are a lot of unknowns. For example, they talk about a national energy productivity study for energy efficiency, for vehicle efficiency and a whole range of other technological measures that will help deal with emissions, but the detail is completely missing. They talk about safeguard standards that when you look at it, it suspiciously to me looks like cap and trade, which is set the baseline emissions and then penalise if someone goes above those emissions.
Well, that would be good. Labor supports cap and trade.
Well, but this goes contrary to what they have publicly said. There is no consistency in terms of what they've said in some elements of the package.
But if the outcome's
and the other thing is too, it's the cost on the budget as well. We are asking for taxpayers to subsidise polluters to do the heavy lifting on reduction, which is not an efficient way to get this done. So, if you have AIG coming out and saying, for example, the Australian Industry Group, that they have very deep concerns about the clear absence of detail about how this will all be met, I think there are more questions to be answered and more detail that's being demanded.
Scott Ryan, the Australian Industry Group, has calculated that an emissions trading system could deliver this kind of target at a cost of something like $100 billion. But through the government's policy, it would cost $250 billion, and that cost borne by the taxpayer. Is direct action scalable enough to be able to afford to meet these sort of targets, or as Ed Husic says, there will have to be other things like cap and trade included?
To sum up Ed's complaint there, it costs too much, but I'm not sure why. We won't tell you what we'll do, but we'll just criticise from the sidelines. Australia's targets announced yesterday are entirely respectable for Australia with our comparable nations. 26 to 28%, and on a per capita basis, because most of the developed world is not growing its population at the rate of Australia, on a per capita basis, we are cutting by the most in the developed world, which reflects the fact that we did have the highest emissions.
And we will still have the highest emissions.
But we're also cutting by the most per capita with a growing population in the developed world. Now, the targets are met by a whole range of measures. And the whole point is we have a renewable energy target, we have state-based mechanisms, we have vehicle emission standards, we have safeguard mechanisms, we have a whole range, a whole suite of measures that actually ensure Australia has been the only developed country to meet its Kyoto 1 and Kyoto 2 targets, and we've set targets that we can meet this time. And I tell you what the most important thing about a target is, from any of the developed nations, it's did you meet your last promises? And Australia is the only country that's met all of its promises. And people like Ed and his side of politics were saying only a year ago, as Greg Hunt pointed out, we had no chance of meeting our Kyoto 2 targets by 2020, yet it looks like we will meet and exceed them and have some carryover. So our policy is we take the credibility from the fact that we have met our commitments, and we're making a comparable and respectable commitment with similar like nations for the next 10 years, and on a per capita basis, we're doing the most in the world. That's the sort of judgment the Australian people want. A fair commitment, an achievable commitment, and one that allows us to hold our head high globally.
And Husic, when can we expect a target from Labor? Because at the moment, the government has its target on the table, but for voters, they need to want to compare both sides of politics. When can we expect a target?
Bill Shorten announced in the lead up to National Conference a very strong target in terms of the generation of energy via renewable sources. We have consistently supported the renewable sector in the face of what appeared to be a very ideological campaign from the government to effectively shut down renewables in this country, and the Prime Minister championing the fact that that's what he was trying to do on radio. And we believe that we do need to get serious on this, not only from the perspective of doing what we can to ensure that we can respond to climate change effectively, but there are also clear imperatives for us to generate energy in a much cleaner way. In terms of what the Coalition are trying to spruik at the moment, and the claim that we're meeting our targets, the claim in relation to meeting our targets has very little to do with anything this government has done since it's been elected. Let's be absolutely clear about that. The big reasons, if you saw when we brought in what we did in government, and we saw massive drops in emissions as a result of what we'd put in place. You'd also had some other impacts too. The changes to efficiency standards that, with respect, I do acknowledge that the Howard government brought in standards to energy efficiency and were followed up by us in government, and the way in which state governments also have standards for energy use, for example, in residential development, and also in terms of commercial use of energy. These had big impacts. Other things like, for example, the changes in manufacturing in this country and the energy demands on, or the usage by manufacturing, and also the economic impact of the GFC and subduing economic growth. These all had big impacts in their own way in emissions, but nothing, absolutely nothing, has been contributed by direct action and anything this government has done since its election to reducing emissions.
When will Labor release its own carbon reduction target? Will it release a target, or will it simply see how the government fares at Paris? And can we assume that a Labor target would be more ambitious than the government's target? So,
on top of what we've announced, and in terms of the vision that we've outlined in terms of the use of renewable energy as a way or a mainstay for energy generation in this country into the future, we'll obviously have to take stock of what the government's proposed and how they're doing it. But it's very hard to do so when key core components remain off the table. And by that I mean the modelling that has been used. You're expecting a response out of us, but the modelling that has been used to generate the target that we're discussing right now hasn't been put on public display or been released in any way to be able to have any meaningful analysis of what's being put forward. So that needs to happen. And in the absence of it...
Why do you need the modelling of direct action? Because you're not going to implement direct action, you're going to have another system.
We're not talking about the modelling of direct action, we're talking about the target that has been put on the table yesterday and the modelling that has been used to claim that we will be able to reach it. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, Scott Ryan, the last word.
Oh, look, if the Labor Party is going to keep biting at the green, Jack Russell nipping in its left heel, it's going to actually find itself caught again. Their promise from their national conference was simply a massive increase in electricity prices. And what we've seen from Ed today reflects Labor's quandary. Do we chase the Greens down the left path, or do we defend Australian households and small businesses? The plan the government announced is realistic, it's achievable, and it reflects our commitments and achievements in the past.
Scott Ryan, Ed Husic, thanks for your time.
Thanks. You.